Hello, welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, my name is Jules. I'm a freelance filmmaker working in Montreal, Canada, and I just wrote my first feature-length screenplay. As a short film director, I've written a few 5 to 10 page scripts, and there's a unique, fun, and immediate challenge when it comes to creating a short form narrative where you get to explore ideas that are fit for that format. So I wanted to see if I had it in me to build a long form narrative and where that would take me creatively. Here are the 4 things I learned after writing my first feature-length screenplay. The first thing I learned was what was going to make me the most productive, and that turned out to be note-taking. I found that note-taking was, most of the time, the essential step between the idea and the word written down on a page. I've had in my experience a very hard time typing fresh ideas right into the screenplay software, so taking notes has been for me a great way to assemble ideas and get my thoughts either in order or in disorder so I can get a clear or unclear view of what it is I want to do. I found myself using Google Keep Notes a lot, especially when I was out in the wild, but by far my favorite note-taking technique was basic handwriting. I went through a few notepads for this last screenplay, filling them with my chicken scratch, which is a weird mix of all caps and cursive. And the notes I was taking were anything from dialogue ideas to scene ideas to general structure. And that's basically what was the strongest driving force in my creative process for this screenplay. I would find myself also just thinking about the script, and I do think that thinking is note-taking, but only if the thought is followed by documentation of that thought, because otherwise all your ideas are just in the wind and you don't capture them or turn them into something on the page. So the second thing I learned after writing my first screenplay is that the old adage, writing is rewriting, is absolutely true. Especially when you're dealing with long-form narrative, you're constantly going back and forth between dealing with micro events and macro structure, zooming in to analyze specific events, dialogues, or emotional tones, or zooming out to get a glimpse at structure. And when dealing with this long form in time, you're going back and forth in your script. That is to say that finding something new at page 50 might mean changes at page 3. And so you have to adapt and make the changes required for this new creation. Scene descriptions is something that's constantly being rewritten, depending on how much information I feel is required to get the point across in any given scene or sequence. Dialogue is something that's constantly being rewritten. Sometimes I'll throw a paragraph sort of dialogue for one particular exchange and then basically carve it back down to what I actually need, as though I was working with marble. And even notes are rewritten. Sometimes in my notebooks, I'll take down the same notes over and over again. Sometimes I'll just ask a question, and then maybe the act of writing the question is going to help me find the answer. So the third thing I learned while writing my first screenplay was establishing discipline for myself. I'll admit that the first few weeks, if not months, of my writing process was pretty spontaneous in nature. I gave myself some leeway in that I would be writing in a sort of part-time schedule structure. And so the note-taking or the actual writing on the page was something that came and went. There were many nights where I spent 30 minutes to an hour just thinking about the story. And that would keep me up. And if a note came to me, then I would write it down. I had the notepad right next to me on my bedside table. And I even had the tendency to wake up in the middle of the night to put something down. And so I kind of took it up on myself to create a real part-time schedule that I would try to keep as best as I could over the course of the months that I spent writing. This discipline allowed me to, first of all, set myself a strong, solid deadline for which the first draft had to be ready for. And also, it kept my mind working on the script, and it made it feel more real than if this was just something picking up dust on the side of my desk. So the fourth thing I learned writing my first screenplay was something that I felt was very important for me as a filmmaker, is that gear just doesn't matter in the writing process. I feel that writing as a creative process should be as free as possible, and it can't be bogged down by things like technical specs. And that's something that's sort of difficult to wrap your mind around if you spend a lot of time debating technical specs or researching gear for your next project. When you're writing, dynamic range doesn't matter. Theme matters. Shallow depth of field doesn't matter. Story and character matter. When most of your creative output and mental process is behind the camera, involved in the minutiae of creating visuals, it's quite eye-opening how much the act of writing can put things like depth, color contrast, even composition into the very DNA of a project. If your specialty is working behind the camera or behind the scenes, I would highly suggest giving writing a try. And if you have, I'd love to read about your experiences in the comments. Until then, thanks for watching this video. Ciao.